Welcome to the Wholesale Investor Emergence 21 session today on Life Sciences and Genomics. Joining me today, I have four very experienced life science executives, and I'll introduce them to you shortly. Today, we're going to explore trends and developments in genomics and life science investment issues. The genomics industry is evolving from mapping our DNA to editing our DNA. Gene editing promises to transform how we treat and cure disease. And sometime in the near future, we may well be able to cure diseases like Huntington's and cystic fibrosis. As this is an investment conference, we're also going to explore current trends and issues around global investment in life sciences. So joining me today, I have Leslie Chong, the CEO of Imugene, Tong, the Head of Investment of SG Innovate in Singapore, Victoria Gordon, the Managing Director of QBiotics, and Kelly Constable, a venture partner of One Ventures here in Australia. So welcome to you all. To start with, I'm going to ask a question. And prior to you answering that question, I'd like you each to give a brief introduction of both your company and yourself. And that question is probably on everyone's mind and still very topical. And that is, how did COVID-19 and the pandemic impact on investment in life sciences during 2020, and in particular on your company? I sit on the board of a couple of life science venture funds, and I know it's impacted in many ways on both attracting LPs and managing our companies, especially remotely. So I'm going to just go around the group, and I've got everyone's picture in front of me here. So I'll just start to my immediate right. Can we start with you, HH?
Hello, Glenn, and thanks for the introduction. It's a pleasure always to be here and to be invited to speak here again. For those of you who have not heard me introduce myself before, my name is Tong. I'm the Head of Investments for SG Innovate. We're an early stage deep tech investor backed by the Singapore government. And what do we mean by deep tech? Obviously, that's something that I always get asked. Fundamentally, we invest in companies that adopt emerging technologies that will have strong or outsized impact on the economies of the future. So, and that's a constantly moving target. So maybe 5 years ago, we were looking at things like AI, we were looking at things like, blockchain, we're always looking at medical, because medical is constantly evolving. But today, what we are more focused upon are things like artificial intelligence, which remains a core focus for us, quantum technologies, autonomous vehicles, and even in the biomedical space, we have sort of moved a little bit away from the convergence of AI with medtech and doing a little bit more in the therapeutic space, microbiomes, some of these other very interesting areas in biotech. We tend to be early stage investors, usually the first check into the company. Global mandate, we've invested all over the world. We're not restricted just investing in Singapore because we believe that the thesis for biotech is that of a global ecosystem rather than a local one. And probably at this point in time, I should stop promoting what I do and get onto the topic itself, which is, how has COVID-19 impacted us? Now, as what Glenn has said, it has impacted us in terms of being able to fundraise, especially for those companies that had a very short runway leading into the COVID-19 pandemic. We had a little bit of trouble initially raising funds for those that did not have a direct correlation with COVID-19 or the addressing of the issues around COVID-19. But that got better along, as the year progressed, as people got a little bit more optimistic, that it was not all dire. It was not all doom and gloom. So subsequently, we found that it was a bit easier towards the end of the year to extend the runways of a lot of these companies, and not just in the biomedical space, but also in quantum and some of these other areas as well. one of the funny things that we did encounter was that we had a lot more problems, not so much in the fundraising part of it, we had a lot more problems with keeping companies together. Now, if you have ever invested in early stage companies, it's literally like two people, coming together, trying to work together and not realizing that actually they can't really work together that closely when they are forced to do so in a closed environment. So, we had some trouble, trying to sort out issues between founders and their investors, issues between investors on the board itself. And it was quite interesting to see because we did have these problems before, but really we had a lot more, and outsized statistics, when it came to this particular period. So I think when it came to COVID-19, those were the key things that came to mind. Moving forward, things are getting a little bit back to normal. People are becoming a bit more discerning. It's not every biotech company that comes to you and says, we solve COVID-19 and you throw money at them. Now is, we ask them, what do you actually do that is going to address this problem? And so I think we are slowly starting seeing things get back to normal. But I still think it's probably going to be about another 6 months to a year before things really are normal. Back to you, Glenn.
Yeah, thanks, HH. Victoria, as the CEO and Managing Director of an Australian listed company, can you talk a bit about your issues?
Thanks, Glenn. And sorry, we are still an unlisted...
sorry, you are still unlisted. Sorry, yeah, Imugene's listed, yes.
Indeed. And I must say, we've been around for 21 years now and we're still unlisted. Look, it's interesting. In many ways, COVID has certainly shone a light on the life sciences industry. But before we go into that, I better talk about who I am and what our company is. So, look, I'm co-founder, CEO and Managing Director of the QBiotics Group. The QBiotics Group is made up of Ecobiotics, which is our discovery company, and QBiotics, which is development. This is a company that really we specialise in cell signalling small molecules that we discover from our amazing Australian tropical rainforest. And as I said, we've been around for 21 years now. First 10 years, we certainly were functioning as a discovery arm of bigger companies. And then we decided to get into development of our discoveries ourselves. We take a bit of a different approach to development in that we develop our products simultaneously for the human and veterinary environment. And really what that's about is we feel that the veterinary environment with real world disease models is very much a more robust preclinical model that very much informs us and underpins our first entry into the human environment. So what are we doing at the moment? We certainly are concentrating in oncology and wound healing. Oncology is our most advanced. We have a registered veterinary pharmaceutical, registered under the EMA, registered under the FDA, Centre for Veterinary Medicine, the VMD in the UK, Swissmedic, and we're hopefully soon to be registered under the APVMA here in Australia. We take a little longer in Australia to register our drugs. And for the human environment, we're in phase 2. We have 4 clinical trials that we're focusing on at the moment: head and neck squamous cell carcinoma, melanoma, monotherapy, and as many are in combination with pembrolizumab, and soon to look at sarcoma. We have a wound healing product that is quite extraordinary. It is a pharmaceutical, not a device, and it has activity against the range of different wound types. But I could talk about the company forever. I will slow that down now and get back to the question. So, as I mentioned or indicated, that the COVID-19 pandemic and the problems has really very much shone a light, I believe, on the life sciences. I know that some have found it difficult as far as funding, but record amounts have been raised, and the deals that happened in 2020 were significant. I think there were about 2,000 biopartnering deals undertaken, and that the value of that was around about US $180 billion. So an interesting space. I think as far as our company is concerned, we certainly had an impact on our clinical trials. We've absolutely lost 6 months. Things are slow. And it's not only due to the lockdowns, but the knock-on effect as well. We're finding that our clinical trial sites our investigators are diverted with standard of care treatments that just weren't happening and weren't occurring. So it's, as far as that goes, and I think that's really a problem elsewhere. Impact in other areas. I think our manufacturers are a little bit slow, etc. So that's a reasonable problem. But of course, you do as we who get in and start our companies and sort of move into the space, you just get on with the job and solve the problem and keep moving.
Thanks, Victoria. And Leslie, certainly you as an ASX listed company, tell us a bit about how Imugene are going now and what the issues you've had over the last year.
Absolutely. So my name is Leslie Chong, and I'm the MD CEO of the company. And so, we are developing primarily in the cancer space, but with immuno-oncology. We have 2 platforms, the B-cell derived antibodies, as well as the oncolytic virus. And we have 2 studies coming off of each of those platforms currently. And we are going like gangbusters. We actually had a really nice readout from an interim data review of our anti-HER2 vaccine we call HER-Vax. So we were able to still produce a fair amount of data and still enroll. And what Victoria was talking about in terms of certain hospitals that were not enrolling, because we were in India, that did impact us to a certain degree. However, we still were able to get a readout, which is just fabulous. And then we just started an anti-PD-1 cancer vaccine called PD-1 Vax. So we think that we could potentially rival the blockbuster drugs like pembrolizumab. We just started that study, and again, seeing some really interesting results right off, and not have had any problems with enrolling, especially here in Australia, given that we've kept it pretty well controlled here in Australia. So, at the last sort of panel, I think we talked about this and how we can move the business into Australia, and that's exactly what I did. And then we also have a cancer virus. And of course, because of the COVID pandemic, it was a little hard to get a virus tested for toxicology. So yes, that was a bit delayed, and we had to scoot around. And what that did was make Imugene a bit more resourceful. And because due to the pandemic, we were all relegated to work from home, but I think we came out of that pretty well. Rather than flying around as a CEO, speaking with investors and what have you, I was able to really focus on the clinical trials, and that's where my special skills and experience comes from with 23 years of clinical development, specifically in the oncology field. It was kind of nice. And I also got to practice a little bit of my biology by growing my own vegetables. So that was, that was quite nice to be able to do. So in some ways, I think the pandemic has really made us much more resourceful. And I think now that we are able to test our toxicology into a specific lab, I think that we found a lab that is superior and not busy doing any other work, and they can focus on our product. So, and I'm incredibly fortunate. I'm one of those companies that we're well funded. So I didn't actually have to go and look for funding, which was probably a blessing in 2020. And I didn't, because we had a successful capital raise just at the end of 2019. So we're fairly cashed up. So we were in good standing with the pandemic was able to move the business more into Australia and get that Australia focus that I wanted to do and had a goal to do. And in the meantime, I was able to save some money and still produce our products.
Thanks, Leslie. And Kelly, as a Australian life science venture company, tell us a bit about One Ventures and your experiences during the year.
Sure. So my background is I actually come from the life sciences sector. I was in pharma and biotech for 20 years on the pharma side, on the commercialization side. And I spent the last 10 years of that co-founding businesses inside of Amgen around digital health and AI, and cardiovascular and precision oncology in both the US and Europe. I moved to Australia 4 years ago and really immersed myself in precision oncology and genomics as a board member, CEO. And I've started my own company where we help surround ourselves around early biotechs, startup companies to help them commercialize. I joined One Ventures about a year ago as a part-time venture partner. And I also am spending quite a bit of time in gene therapy these days. So broad portfolio, but majority of my portfolio is precision oncology and gene therapy. I would say, one, I absolutely agree with what Victoria said. There's been I think, having spent my whole life in the industry, that there's been a bit of a lift in the industry, and the pandemic has refocused the public on the contribution that science and industry makes to therapy. So I think that that's been extremely positive, and I'm sure that's been part of the contribution of the lift in an ongoing growing investment sector. So I think that's been really positive. As far as specific impact, I'll give you two examples. Just thinking about Leslie's examples. In one company that's raising capital, I would say the pandemic was probably beneficial because it was more efficient to raise capital globally than going country to country, especially when you're in Australia. You really appreciate the downtime when it takes so much time to fly around the world and meet venture capitalists. So I'd say that virtual environment was a positive. I think the downside, we would all say in the venture capital community, is not being able to meet the founders or the management team live is an extreme disadvantage. As you all know, we're investing in people. So the not having the opportunity to physically engage and understand that individual at another level is probably a disadvantage. On the other end of the spectrum, another company was in the process of launching into the US at the beginning of the pandemic. And so unfortunately, that company was extremely disadvantaged because revenue was significantly slowed. We lost a year of revenue. The company was planning on using that revenue to raise capital in the US. So these kind of interdependencies between the slowdown of the market, not in that particular company, not being able to have our management team go and be overseeing the launch in the US definitely disadvantaged it. So I think it depends on the company and the situation. When you look across the portfolios, there have been some positives and some negatives. I think one of the things when we look at Australia, one of the benefits will be, going back to the example about clinical trials, is that we will become more attractive from a clinical trials perspective. We hope, if we can be successful in importing the clinical trials that have been slowed in the UK and the US. I think that's a significant opportunity created by COVID, but we have to seek it. And then the second question I have about the impact that's still TBD is this impact of no travel. I think it's been okay when the whole world is in the same situation. I'm a bit concerned that if we're all in the same place virtually, but if the rest of the world opens their borders and begins international travel in the next 5 years, and we cannot go engage the global markets, and we can't allow the global markets to come in, whether that be investors, customers, companies, I'm very concerned at the disadvantage that will put Australia in.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I've had a personal experience over the last 8 or 9 months in that I sit on the board of a Swiss-based public company listed in Zurich, and I've brought into the company a new president, a regulatory affairs executive, and a couple of product development people. I've never met any of the other directors. Personally, I've seen their faces on Zoom calls for 6 or 7 months now, but I've actually never met any of them. And they've got a little bit of travel going on in Europe, not much, but they are managing to get around. So I think 12 months, 18 months will probably be about it for us. I think we'll have to, we can't be an island all alone down here forever. Well, thank you. The next question I'm going to pose to everyone, as this is a life science investment conference and session, there's a lot of people out there interested in what they should be looking at in terms of their own portfolios or their own investments. So can I ask each of you just what's hot at the moment in terms of life sciences? What do you think are the areas that are going to really offer opportunities for investors out there over the next 1 to 2 years? And I'll start again with you, HH.
Okay, well, I get to answer this before the rest, so I get the advantage of sort of spreading it out. I think, well, for us, because we're a deep tech and we cut across a lot of different industries, I think the whole ecosystem around COVID-19, everything from manufacturing, delivery, supply chain, monitoring, the drug delivery, education, all these are going to be important in the coming year because, as you quite rightly point out, as Kelly did as well, if we can't travel, that's going to put a huge dampener on things. And those countries that are willing to allow their borders to be a little bit more porous might suffer a little bit more in terms of the effect of COVID-19, but economically, they're more likely to have a more robust economy once things get back on even keel. So I think that those companies are looking at things like digital health passports. How are they going to transport drugs from point to point? Given the sensitivity of some of the mRNA drugs out there in terms of temperature fluctuations. Those are things that could be ancillary to the life science industry, but nonetheless a critical part of the whole solution. So those are things that we are looking at. We are also looking in the microbiome space, simply because we have read. There's a lot of literature in connecting microbiomes with existing health issues. None of them really have progressed to the stage where they've identified a particular biome or something to address or connected it to a particular illness, whether it's arthritis, Parkinson's, or whatever. But I think that's something that's going to be interesting in the coming year. I'm not going to talk about oncology because I'm definitely not the person to speak about that in front of two experts on the panel. But of course, oncology always remains front and center of what we look at. You can't avoid the big C. Cardiovascular illness is another area. But things that as Singapore, we are actually interested in because of the aging population is we're probably going to spend a bit more time understanding biological gerontology from an investor perspective, the whole aging process, what are the drugs, the management, the healthcare systems that are going to surround this. So I think for us, that's what we are likely to focus on in the biomedical space in the coming year.
Thank you. Victoria, any comments?
Yes, thanks, Glenn. And HH, you did a great job on and outlining most of the areas of interest. I think one of the particular areas of great interest certainly is the microbiome. Like certainly we work in cancer here with our intratumoral, and as I said, we're working with the anti-PD-1 at the moment. And as an example, we're getting some great demonstration, in the industry that, the microbiome certainly is, they have predictive biomarkers of response to the cancer immunotherapies. I'm sure Leslie is sort of certainly interested in this area, just to really improve that, the success rate of the immunotherapeutics. And I think it's my doctorate was in microbiology, so I certainly have a particular interest, in that area. But along with what HH was saying, it is a different world. We're not, we have restricted access. We are doing things certainly at a distance. And so things like automated content management, automated documentation, certainly of clinical trials. I think the regulatory area certainly was moving to electronic CRFs and trial master files, etc. But even more so, I know in this company we certainly have moved into that space because it's much more secure, also much more searchable. My team isn't going as insane with the approach to handling data. So certainly cancer in this company is uppermost in our minds. Immunotherapeutics is hot and will continue to be hot, but also the complements to that area, the intratumoral therapies. I think small molecules that were out of favour for quite some time are coming back in favour. There certainly is a growing interest in small molecules and into the area of the diseases of ageing, cancer, absolutely, but other areas, like even in the area of things like venous leg ulcers and the general sort of problems of the geriatric environment. We're seeing some interesting areas come up, such as the psilocybin compounds that you can find in the magic mushrooms. They're sort of certainly hitting the environment. Dementia, having a big impact on dementia, and certainly on those who are actually having some of the mental illness areas. I think it's a fascinating area, and I think it's an area that is going to have a lot more interest into the future.
Thanks, Victoria. I know, Leslie, oncology is something that Imugene is very involved in, but are there other areas that you think are going to be prominent over the next 1 to 2 years?
Well, look, I think COVID has brought a lot of interest to vaccinating worldwide for several new flu-like symptoms that will arise. I think we're going to have to, as HH alluded to, the whole idea of manufacturing really scaling up that level and protecting the whole world against a pandemic like this will be something that people will be looking at and evolving quite quickly. I think my husband is a professor of quantum physics, so that's, always a hot topic. Along with oncology, I've got the quantum physics telling me about all the new ventures that he's going through. So there are a lot of things in the information that I think we have something to look forward to. People are wanting information and data at the speed of light, be it cancer data or be it vaccination data. These things are imperative that we evolve and move across. I think for me, I am primarily focused on the whole cancer immunotherapy. I think CAR-T gene therapy and cellular therapy that we sort of started off speaking about, I think that is pretty hot these days due to the fact that it actually can say the C word, which is cure, which is not something that a lot of people can apply to when it comes to cancer therapies. And so gene therapy, cellular therapy, and especially towards a solid tumor therapy, understanding the tumor microenvironment enough so that you know exactly how your drug is working, and given that payload and what that does to your immunity is something that every company is working towards. For me, I've always felt that if you follow science, the investment or the money will come. And so you just have to be smart about how you develop your product, have a meaningful space in it, or fill a meaningful space. I think combination, given that PD-1s have proliferated over every biotech companies of the world, and they're looking for combination that could actually alleviate and prolong life and be safe at the same time. So having that quality of life, having efficacy that actually is meaningful to a patient. I think there's a lot of things to look forward to.
Thank you. And Kelly, what are your thoughts on what's One Ventures in particularly interested in?
Well, I think just looking at, One Ventures, which is more focused on Australia, but kind of broadly from a venture capital lens, I would agree with everything that's said. I'll add from a therapies perspective, I would agree with Leslie that cell and gene therapies is a really hot topic for a number of reasons. Most importantly, because the promise of finally cure. It has brought rare diseases and ultra rare diseases to the forefront in the investment community in a way that we would not have predicted 10 or 20 years ago. So I think it just not only the promise of that, but the valuations that gene therapy is getting is very attractive to investors. And then the time to market, right? So we see a lot of these therapies by the nature of gene therapy getting approved much faster with phase 2 data. So there's a lot of attributes that are very attractive around that. And in regards to categories, I agree with everything said, and I would probably add an emphasis to the idea of mental illness. Mental illness is an extremely hot topic from an investment perspective. And the criticality of mental illness, even though it's always been there, COVID has brought mental illness to the forefront in most countries. And so that becomes a lot more attractive. We've commented on CNS, including aging. So CNS has a lot of promise in gene therapy, but also just across different modalities, a lot happening there. I think those are hot. In regards to technology, I think the technology in healthcare, one of the benefits of COVID is that it is absolutely accelerating the integration of technology, whether that be in drug development, whether it be in delivery. One example is there's a company now that is doing a pilot test in the US on being able to drop vaccines at people's doorfront via a drone with, I won't name the company, and the patient would be able to self-administer the patch in 10 minutes and then self-dispose of it. So transformations in supply chain delivery is really being spurred along by COVID. So I think that's going to be, those technologies will be attractive for investors who may not want to go down the therapy side, but maybe more comfortable with technology. And then I think we're going to see a lot more with platforms in drug development. In both on supply chain, but also on the development side in gene therapy. So I think platforms are going to be kind of the next decade of promise in time to development, efficiency of development, and the ability to standardize. Really attractive.
Thank you. I think if someone had asked us 12 months ago whether we asked each of us what we thought would happen and if we could develop a vaccine, a virus vaccine inside of 12 months or so, most of us probably would have been skeptical. It's just been amazing globally. I think there's 6 or 7 companies now that have a vaccine approved. And what do you think have been the big lessons out of that around accelerated development, concentrated focus on particular developments? Anyone have a comment, HH?
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to be a bit cynical here. I'm going to say that, if the problem is big enough and there's a big impact on the economy globally, people will sort of align their interests to make sure that there's a solution to the problem. And I think we've seen that happen. We've seen great collaboration in the area of drug development, to try to address this problem. Multiple countries, running their own clinical trials. Of course, it generates its own set of problems, where the data itself may not be, you've got this issue of, is the data, totally aligned in different countries. But yeah, honestly, I think that the key driver was the fact that everyone's economy was impacted, everyone's livelihood was impacted. It's very important that no one could travel for holidays. So I think that moved certain countries to emphasize this as well. But yeah, I honestly would never have believed that they could have a drug out in the market, pass their safety efficacy tests, and actually put it out, especially with something as, I wouldn't say innovative, but something as new for approval as mRNA. I mean, if they had said that this is a typical vaccine, yeah, probably they could have squeezed the timelines, but for them to take such an innovative approach, I know it's been banging around in the labs for a while, but this is the first time it's actually been able to break out of the labs and gone to the mass market. And honestly, I thought that not only is it incredible, I was also a little bit afraid initially, because I was like, do I really want to take this? I'm not sure. But I saw some of the data and I said, okay, maybe it's not such a bad thing. But I've not taken it yet. So I'm not on the list of priorities at the moment.
Victoria, what are your comments and what have you seen in terms of? Sorry,
I'm just smiling and shaking my head. I felt exactly the same way about the vaccine as HH. I was, when asked, well, would you take it? And just a certain amount of nervousness, but that does, that really does then focus us up on the regulatory requirements. It is such a, these are such long-standing and big hurdle requirements from the regulators, and suddenly they've been shortened right down. And safe drugs, this safe vaccine has been produced in lightning speed, so that we have to ask the questions, well, why is that so? And why are we faced with, 7 to 15 years of, slogging at developing our drugs and going through the long-standing 1, 2, phase 3 and then multiples, to get that done. So I think the questions must be pushed straight back to the regulatory groups, saying, well, what is going on, guys? Why the difference? Because these drugs have gone through in 10 to 20%, of the usual time frame. That's exciting because if we look at the pedigrees of drugs, and there's some great pharmaceuticals, great medical devices, and answers out there in the market, but we really need new innovation and new problems to be solved. I think cancer is a good example of that. Certainly the leading drugs, hands down, are, the immunotherapeutics, immune checkpoint inhibitors, etc. They're doing great strides, but are they enough? Like if you look at their report cards, on average, and these are sweeping statements, but 30 to 50% efficacy, some really worrying adverse events with these drugs, and we haven't really solved the problem, but it is such a long, expensive, hard road. Let's address that. Let's shorten that up. Let's see, where we're going with that. And of course, reducing the costs. It's still outrageously expensive to develop drugs.
Your thoughts, Leslie?
Well, I think it's the only time I saw government intervention be helpful as opposed to be obstructive. And I agree with Victoria. I think it is a very exciting stage, and we do need to look at, the regulators need to look at why do they approve certain drugs over others when clearly some drugs are better, but they have to, when a drug has put their flag in the sand, you then have to build another mountain just to get a flag near that. It's a hard road, and I think we need to look at how harnessing and acceleration really works for drugs that could be quite helpful.
Kelly, any comments?
I echo those sentiments as well. I think some interesting observations, since HHU allow us to be cynical. I think a couple observations is it's obvious that journalists don't study statistics. It's a bit disappointing how much the public relies on headlines in regards to decisions, characterization, or updates for their health. So just the disconnect, I think, between and all of us being in healthcare can probably appreciate this. I think the disconnect globally with people's perception of the situation, or just how we've looked at all this and how much this has been driven by the media is just a shocking reality for me. I think the most important insights that have come are yet to come. So I think the data for the next decade on what we were really learning and being able to look at cohorts, really being able to track the different viruses and everything, I think there's still so much we're going to learn, so many positives. I think on the business side, it's interesting to see if the business model with industry and governments will change because of this. So I think that's one thing I'm hoping for, bulk buying and volume. I think there's been quite a few insights per country on their own health system, their agility And I hope that that will lead to more modernization and more thoughtful planning around how to handle mass conditions in a population more efficiently and faster. I think on the individual level, what's a really interesting observation of people is that a couple of years ago, I spoke at Oz Biotech about privacy and our resistance of the sharing our health data in Australia. And it's really interesting that then came the pandemic and we've all been sharing our location via health apps. And so one of the important takeaways to me is what we always know in study in business is that a solution needs a problem or an unmet need. And suddenly, when we were all at risk of a pandemic, we had a greater appetite to adopt different behaviors, such as apps sharing of health data. So it's a good reminder, and hopefully we'll have an appetite to adopt more technologies that lead to better outcomes because of our vulnerability during the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. And just taking up on one of the comments HH made, it's amazing what can happen when money gets involved, and the world realised that not only did we have an health issue, but we were also had an economic issue. And it brings to mind 5 or 6 years ago when President Obama announced that they were doing a moonshot on cancer, if you remember that, and they were going to cure all cancers in the next 5 years, and virtually nothing happened. So if something else good that comes out of COVID is that we can actually accelerate and put global efforts towards solving some of these, critical unmet medical needs, there might be something good that came out of the pandemic. I guess time will tell. The organisers asked us to explore one other question on this panel, which is primarily focused on Australia. So I won't leave HH out entirely because I did read an interesting article in, I think it was the Financial Review here in Australia today, talking about the Singapore government now ready to move out of its pandemic hiatus, as many countries are. How do you see the biotech, life sciences industry coming out of this in Singapore in terms of both government support and industry support, HH?
I think that's a good question. Candidly speaking, I think the government has always been focused on the life sciences. A lot of money has been allocated to it. Singapore does benefit from a few advantages. We are a commercial hub, so a lot of big pharma come here and set up their regional HQs, which in turn sort of allows us to be, a certain sense, a crossroads for information regarding the latest developments, as well as a means to attract global talent in the biotech space. We also have we have got the research institutions, the universities, but more importantly, I think the government has, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was in December, they announced that they're going to allocate $25 billion over a period of a couple of years for deep technology, and biotech was actually a key component of that $25 billion. So again, I'm speaking perhaps because I'm an investor, but certainly money talks. It does tend to bring together or grease the wheels of certain developments in that area. But that's not all it is. I mean, the institutions do great research. We do have translational institutions which translate that research into companies. But perhaps what we don't do so well is that we don't have those early stage investors like us. And that's probably one of the reasons why SG Innovate exists, is to sort of bridge the gap between, when they come out of those translational institutions and they're looking for their first check. That's where we need to be, and I'm hoping that a lot more investors need to be. But we don't have that many early stage investors. But if you're at the preclinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, there are actually a lot of venture capital firms, private equity firms just queuing up to sort of put money into you. So I think that we still have gaps, and that's not a bad thing, because it means that we know that there are problems and that we have got to try to solve those problems. But I'm pretty optimistic as to where this is going to go. The new fund that we have raised is focused on biotech as well. So that in itself tells you or gives an inkling as to the thinking of the government in terms of how it's trying to push the whole ecosystem forward.
Thank you. Now to our three Australian panellists. The question, heaven forbid if there's actually any politicians interested enough to watch this session, but during my time with Biotech, I spent 15 years trying to convince politicians of all persuasions, state and federal, that they should be focusing on this sector with varying degrees of success. But aren't we all grateful now that we have CSL, an investment made 100 years ago, and they're able to produce hopefully a big part of the coronavirus vaccine that Australia will need, and we're just thankful that they're here. But the question to each of you is, where do you see the gaps in Australia in terms of infrastructure, big picture stuff? What would you like to see both government and industry involved in, say, over the next 4 or 5 years here in Australia to support this sector? And I'll start with you, Victoria.
Thanks, Glenn. And look, I'll start off with certainly agreeing with HH in that early stage investment. I think over the few decades that I've been working in the industry in Australia, I have seen so many great ideas and some really great technology just not seen the light of day because the would-be entrepreneurs or those who are sort of running these early companies, they've gone through the 3 Fs, the friends, families, fools money, and then they hit the valley of death. There's just not that support between there and really sort of proving up their technology to attract, the substantial investment and goodness. We early on, particularly in the industry in Australia, we saw so many small companies go into the listed environment, and it was just a death knell. And that's just yes, Australian government, look to the great innovation that we have in Australia. We are, we're fantastic at that, and I must say that we're great at exporting it and selling it off early. So a structure where there's both early stage investment and also early stage support and advice. We've got some great talent in Australia, but this is a small pool. So certainly encouraging the companies that are sadly there is the statement, there's the one product wonder statement out there, but what they need is not to be spreading the talent thin. Do some mergers, get together and build, really create a critical mass. And so the limited, unfortunately, of course, it's due to a small population, but we have limited talent associated with being able to manage companies and manage businesses. Like, let's not fool anyone. We are in the business of developing our products to get a return on investment. We are in the business of business, and I think that is something that I think should be encouraged more. And the development of business acumen and an understanding of what that actually really means. I think the other area, back to the regulatory environment, I think the government does really need to look at our regulators, and I'm talking about the TGA and also our veterinary product regulators, the APVMA. We are, I think that we could be aligning ourselves a little more with the groups like the EMA or the FDA. I'll use our veterinary drug as an example. This is registered under the EMA, and we're marketing in Europe. We're registered under the FDA Centre for Veterinary Medicine, and we're still sitting. We've had our application into the APVMA for the last 2 years, and there's no alignment. There could be an approach such as restricted marketing until we've got EMA registration, restricted marketing until they have a chance to assess the application, and then either give full more marketing or demands for more information, etc. I think we need to get a little bit smarter in Australia associated with that. And just my last point here is sadly the lack of the support providers, the lack of good quality GMP drug API and drug product manufacturers, the lack of quality toxicology providers, the lack of really CROs for our clinical trials that really know their business, they really understand that they need to partner with the companies that they're working with. I suppose that's turned into a bit of a complaint. Please don't misunderstand me. I think there are some good providers in Australia, but there's not enough. So,
thank you, Leslie.
Well, Victoria, I have to agree with you 100% in that I think success begets success. And coming from US, especially around San Francisco, where it's the hub of biotech and technology, and there's a reason for that, because they have seen successes, they have the infrastructure. I think we too can have this. So if the Australian biotech were to merge, get together, support one another, and actually have the talent, and I agree with you 100%, Victoria, the talent pool is quite limited because you get your training in the US. Kelly, you come from the US and you probably got at your pharma company much more training than you would have gotten here, because you get to see the crux of development there. And you get to be in from early. I mean, I'm fortunate. I've taken 4 drugs from literally to bench to bedside. So I've seen it all done. But that experience is quite hard to get here simply because it's not done here. So I think what we need is success. If we can lead the way, see it all the way through from bench to all the way to the regulators who understand the process, have the manufacturing infrastructure, have those funding available, we can see a level of success and market drugs here as opposed to wait until we get it from the FDA, EMEA, going through a whole litany of things. When we have the patient population, I mean, anytime I've ran studies whilst I was at GSK, Genentech, Exelixis here in Australia, delivery was 100%. Clinical trials filled up here in Australia. There's a patient population, there's a need, there's a want. And I just think that we need to up our skill sets, and success will build on that success.
Thank you. And your thoughts finally, Kelly?
Oh, I mean, I couldn't have said it better than Leslie and Victoria. I absolutely agree with everything that they've said. I think there's, I guess the only thing I would add is that there's this cultural perception I've picked up on, and I'm obviously still a rookie here, about the private sector and commercialization by some. So there's some kind of a divide I pick up between the public and private sector. And I think other places like the UK, I see a closer collaboration between the two to try to get through that valley of death. So I think we need to reconcile, if we really want to build the private sector and we really want commercialization, we need to embrace the intent of that and the objectivity of having commercialization as a skill and a career path here in Australia. Underneath that, we need to breed the talent. It hasn't been our backbone previously. So we have a very strong platform of believing that we should be importing talent with that experience, and or bringing back Australians who've gone overseas to get that talent and build the opportunities for those people to breed and teach it here locally. It's not commercialization, and business acumen and financial acumen is not going to be learned in school. It is the scar tissue, it's the failure, it's the successes, it's the having a network of picking up people across the drug development pathway, because there's numerous experts, as you both alluded to. You have to have a network of experts to call. It's not done by a contributor of one. It's a collaboration of experts. So we need to fundamentally embrace those principles of commercialization and have a very specific plan around breeding talent so that in the next decade, we have our own bench of executive management, board members, founders who have built companies and exited. We can't rely on an N of 10 So I think we have to reconcile, if it's our intent to commercialize, then we need to specifically have the talent to embrace and carry those assets through the valley of death and get to the other side successfully.
Thank you. Can I, Glen, I might just, if I may, just one last comment on. Yeah. And it's all about the valley of death. I think there's a significant opportunity for really patient investors in being able to invest in the early technology. That match up of those with the deep pockets and plenty of time, But of course, what is missing there are the analysts who actually understand that early stage investment. So, there's some great early stage that's actually going to hit the wall because they don't get the funding. There are, in my experience, there's plenty of, and particularly in the angel investors and the high net worth individuals who really are just want to get excited about something that they're investing in. There is, these two areas, but the link up is the analysts that really do understand early stage, and to marry these two groups together. I just thought it was an important point to make.
It's very important. And if you look back 10 or 15 years ago, we had 6 to 10 really top-notch life science analysts in Australia, and there's not many left now. It's a good point. It's another important point. And can I ask a wholesale investor and Martha, if you can get Steve to look at this session and condense some of these thoughts and see what you guys can do in terms of talking to especially the Commonwealth Government. They've come out strongly since the pandemic and looked at, I think there might be a new awareness of just what we have here. We have all known it for many years, but if they're serious about promoting and supporting life sciences, especially in terms of sovereign supply, that we've seen issues that have come about during the pandemic, then maybe wholesale investor can take some of these thoughts from this session and present them to the relevant people in Canberra. I think that'd be a great idea. Look, can I thank H.H. Tong again, Victoria Gordon, Leslie Chong and Kelly Constable. Thank you for being part of our session today. And to wholesale investor, we appreciate you keeping a focus on life sciences in your portfolio, and look forward to catching up with all of you again one time soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Glen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks, Glen.
Glen.